First of all, as you know, this is one of the forums of the ARCO Lisboa online edition we are developing this year. Unfortunately, we cannot see each other physically this year, but next year we will be together again in Lisbon, 13th to 16th of May. We already have the dates, so we are looking forward to that moment where we can be together again. But now we want to start this talk on institutions. I want to thank our three panelists. Miguel Mesquita, he is the coordinator, the director of this talk, and he will be talking with Beatrice Leanza, executive director of MAAT in Lisbon. Thank you, Beatrice. And Philippe Vergne, director of Museo Serralves. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the two of you for being here today with us. Yes, and being part of this talk.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. So, with no further ado, I let you start. And well, I will be here in the back. I'm sure everybody knows how this works, but you can remove my black screen because I will take my video out, and you will only see the three of them. So, well, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maribel, and thanks to all the people watching us. And once again, thank you, Philippe and Beatrice, for having accepted my invitation to participate in this talk. I will just do a small introduction to clarify why I have proposed this talk, in which we will have the wonderful opportunity to get to know the projects from the directors of these two institutions, but also to get to know their views on the current situation on art institutions and how they are addressing these issues in their programming. So as a brief contextualization, the Museum of Art and Architecture emerged more or less 4 years ago, following a continuous work of cultural patronage by the EDP Foundation, and basically joined Serralves, Berardo and Gulbenkian as one of the main art museums in Portugal. However, and I must say, despite the important role that Gulbenkian had and still has on the promotion of Portuguese art and artists, Serralves and MAAT have consolidated their relevance that has earned them an international reputation. I think it's important to remember that Serralves itself was fundamental in establishing the avant-garde artistic practices from the post-dictatorship, and the recognition and even the recognition of contemporary art in Portugal. And it was this long process of construction and formation of the museum that allowed for a coherent strategy regarding the collection and the mission of the museum itself that has contributed to its international appreciation. And so for almost 2 decades, I think we were having as a reference outside for contemporary art in Portugal, this museum in Porto. And so the arrival of MAAT and its quick international recognition kind of creates a new paradigm, I think, to the Portuguese cultural art scene, which now has institutions of note in both poles of the country. And I also know that comparatively to other countries, the geographical distance between these two museums is not that big, because it's about a 3-hour drive. But culturally and socially, these two cities are quite distant. So the existence of these two institutions kind of creates a balance, which I see can become essential to for the enhancement of cultural engagement of the population, but also of the artistic practices in Portugal. And what strikes me as exciting in this particular situation is that basically it became a moment where we can actually have a fresh talk and look at these new museums and what they're doing and how they can reshape the artistic scene. not this, like, because not only do we have these two important institutions in Portugal, but also because this is an unprecedented situation, you know, where both the museums have renewed their directions, and both the people selected are foreigners. And once again, we had this the other day, I say this with no nationalistic intention. It's just that I find very interesting all the particularities around this. The fact that you, Beatrice, Philippe, have just got here at the same time, basically, like Philippe arrived 4 months earlier. And the two of you come from from countries that are the major economies in the world, but from the complete opposite on the social political spectrum, you know. And it's very interesting also to have you, like, both European going abroad and then coming back to this moment in Portugal. And it's a little bit considering all of this that I would like to start by asking you, what are your impressions, even though I believe they might be quite fresh, about the artistic landscape in Portugal and the cultural institutional tissue of Portugal? And maybe I can start with you, Philippe, since you arrived first to Portugal.
Yeah, but I'm a gentleman, so maybe Beatrice should start. I'm happy to start. I mean, it's a conversation, so. Well, there is something that was, for me, very striking when I started, and I have to be perfectly honest. I'm discovering the art scene in Portugal. I don't think I was hired because of my incredible knowledge of the Portuguese art scene. But what for me was what has been very inspiring, and I don't know if it's the same for you, Beatrice, in Lisbon and with MAAT, is how much the artists are present, how much they, in my daily life, in my work, that there is an identification of the art scene, of the artist, with the institution that I'm honored to represent. That I feel that they identified with it. When they don't identify with it, they let us know. So it means that they care. And that there is some kind of a symbiosis between Serralves and the expectation of artists for Portugal. So that's one thing. I was also quite amazed, and I mean happily amazed by somehow the radicality of the art scene. I think it's a very uncompromising art scene that has, for me, the way I see it, deep root in some of the most radical practice of the late or mid 60s that are still very active when it comes to artistic discourse itself and political and social engagement of the work, a long tradition of working between disciplines. So, I mean, it's going to be very bad. What I'm about to say is going to be very badly perceived. That I have from when I look at actually Serralves collection and I look at the art and the art producer, I have the feeling that the grandfather of Portuguese artists is Marcel Brotars.
Well,
I know, like a French person praising a Belgian artist to be the grandfather of the Portuguese art scene. I think I can pack my bags right now.
No, I think it's like, I would believe a lot of people agree with you as well. So I don't, and if you look back, when I was saying that that Serralves was fundamental on creating even the recognition of the contemporary art scene, is precisely because of that. You know, like it started by recognition of a group of artists from the 60s and the 70s that were fundamental to the entire construction of the contemporary art scene. So I think that it's a little bit, it's expectable that, and I understand why you would feel the presence of that.
And also there's something that for me has been very also interesting, and I don't want, I mean, I would like, is a strong, how strong the voices of women are, from Bonarego, Lourdes Castro, Ana Jota. I think some of the most, for me, some of the most defining work, I mean, it's not exclusive, of course, have been coming also from practice of women artists.
Yeah, but then, I mean, if I may add also to what you mentioned, you know, of course, like, you know, I'm a neophyte, you know, to the local art scene or creative scene as well. I have a background in, you know, like, let's say other areas of the world, but regardless, I think that would struck me really when I arrived, and I've said this before elsewhere, I had a kind of strange and odd feeling of arriving in a city that somehow was very similar in terms of energy, you know, like to the Beijing that I found when I moved there, you know, in the early 2000s. And it has a lot to do, you know, like with the presence of, you know, like very vital, vocal, you know, creative scene with, you know, a sense of potential, and, you know, a sense of, you know, like possibility that, to be honest, is very scarce, you know, like especially across the European context. But another aspect that I believe, well, and perhaps is of course more, you know, in the chords of, you know, like what is also like the radius, you know, like of creative expressions that also MAAT as a museum of art, architecture and technology, you know, needs to look into, is that there is really a plethora of, you know, various and, you know, cross-generational sort of practitioners, you know, like extremely present and doing incredible work across the larger, you know, the expanded field of what could be design practice, for example. So where I would include also architecture for sure. And in a way, I believe like the transformations that the city is going through, you know, has been going through, you know, like in the past few years are definitely, you know, like fodder for, you know, like this type of positively hungry, you know, like vitality, you know, an intellectual kind of proclivity that I actually found in many people. I've started meeting a lot of them immediately when I arrived, and also because this is part of the program that eventually and finally we will be able to, you know, jump start very soon. So you'll hear about our, you know, like opening, you know, reopening date very soon. And through this process, you know, I had a chance also to really, you know, start to get into know what are sort of also certain preoccupations, topics, ways that, you know, the creative scene really wants to be engaged with. And I think that both for possibly, but maybe Philippe, you think differently, for me and you know, like you as you know, external, you know, like to this context, it's also a refreshing, you know, opportunity, right? To kind of engage in conversations that, you know, are in a way completely new, because it's also, and where you are new. So I think that there is some sense of like, you know, an alchemic concoction, you know, in being someone that you can bring, you know, a different perspective, you know, like to perhaps even topics that are really shared. But I really appreciate, and I'm really enthusiastic about this positive energy that for me, that I found here in Lisbon.
And, but when you talk about this, like, because let me just take this chance to get to know a little bit more about the project that you're developing in MAAT right now, and it's opening Beeline, because it's a little bit about this, right? Creating a sense of belonging and of community. It's bringing everybody to the table and discussing the museum and the context itself, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, I don't know if like sort of subconsciously, you know, like it became just for me, it's sort of like to short circuit, you know, like the process. But I found it a very relevant, it is a very relevant question that, I mean, was much debated, you know, in the months and years, couple of years prior to, you know, COVID outbreak. But that is even more relevant now, you know, like looking at the place where we are. Well, the attempt was also that of like rethinking certain institutional models that we often kind of look at in a quite, you know, or, you know, like we don't get an opportunity to really kind of deconstruct because of what the creative industry, you know, like has partly transformed museum into, and I believe that this is truly an opportunity to sort of let go of things that perhaps we wanted to let go and improve others. So, you know, this program also came about because I wanted really to create an opportunity for conversations that I think are happening transversely in different contexts and cities, and bring them forward, not just as contents, but also in ways and forms and methodologies that often, you know, come from the disciplines of art or architecture or, you know, design at large, and see what the museum could appropriate as you know, best case practices. So that's why we are kind of dubbed the project like prototyping the museum. So it's like allowing ourselves like 6 months of, you know, trial and error somehow. So I don't know if I'm gonna get away with it, but you know.
That's what we're gonna be here to find out. But I found interesting at the same time that I don't know if everybody watching is aware, but the project that they're introducing at MAAT, and it's basically also, I believe, the statement for your proposition for the museum. It's called Beeline, and it's a project, like I would say, an installation architectural project commissioned to the studio, the architectural studio Soil, and it basically creates what you, Beatrice, have described as a civic arena, right? Like a place where people come and can actually talk and discuss and project the space of the museum itself. And what I find really interesting about this project, and being an architect myself, is that you kind of give back you give the space back to its original form. You know, like you kind of accept this space as a way to create new narratives, to create and to potentiate these narratives. Mm-hmm. And it's funny that formerly the strategy was to kind of domesticate the space and make it like try to label the spaces in the building of MAAT. You know, like you had the oval room, the oval gallery, the showroom, the video room, which is really restraining in terms of creativity. But also, and when I
totally disagree.
Really?
Yes.
You think that having the names on it and defining the spaces.
No, sorry, I thought you, no, what I disagree with is that that oval space is restraining creativity.
No, I think that the label of, you know, like having different things, it's kind of like giving you already a perspective on how to act on it, you know. But it's so basically I see this new strategy for Beeline as well as a way of really and pragmatically consider a new way of thinking of the museum. But at the same time, when I look at Serralves, and this is why I also kind of would like to talk with you about your notion about about institutions and the challenges that institutions face. The truth is that Serralves is the exact
opposite
of MAAT, sorry, because it's kind of, it follows a very classical structure of art scene. You know, it's basically a reminiscence of the walkways of the Pinacotheques. You know, it's kind of a room follow another, and so I think that in a way, the museum as a building, it's also conditioning or creating the museum as an institution.
Well, yeah, sorry, finish.
No, I was going to ask you something. So no, my idea is that, do you feel that these particularities on the museum actually limit the possibility for him to reinvent itself? Or do you even think that it needs to be reinvented?
Well,
you can
yeah, I think of the museum, of course, every morning. Maybe from time to time, I think of the museum twice a day. Well, yeah, it's a classical model, but I think you have to look at it differently. That what you call, from what I understood you say, what you call the classical model is only one part of Serralves. I think you're talking about the CISA building. And actually, I'm installing my first show right now there. So I'm discovering the building really for the first time. And it's actually quite versatile. So yeah, I mean, it's one of the models. We have rooms and they follow each other, you're right. But rooms, generally, they either follow each other or go on the top of each other. They have this ability. And I'm not an architect, so I don't want to really say definitive things about rooms. But the CISA building is only one part. If you take Serralves Museum, you have this building, which is not as conventional as it seems. Then you have the villa, which is another piece of architecture that allows a very different way to deal with presentation of works of art, because it's a domestic environment, which I find very interesting right now. I think what's interesting to me is that most of the artists whom I bring to Serralves, they want to show in the villa. I show them the space, and then they go back to wherever they belong, and they call me back and say, what about the pink building? Is it available? So there's that. And then we have a park. And I think in terms of a museum model, it creates a very peculiar model, because we have a park, and the park is not only, it's not a sculpture garden, which is the traditional model. It's actually a park it's a garden with sculpture. It's also a garden with cows and pigs and donkeys, because we have a farm. And so it's really created a very different model to think of an institution. I mean, I go on regular basis to read art history to the cows. It was on, they asked for it, so I thought it was very important to make this connection. But it creates the proximity of a museum, a villa, a park, a farm, which is a working farm, which is very unusual. You know, I can say we have cows in the collection. and that create a very different relationship with what you do, and a relationship also with your audience, because we know that the audience coming through has a set of expectation that, you know, if we talk about rethinking the museum, they might be already further than we are in terms of rethinking the museum. And I find that actually quite exciting. From time to time, I send earth from the park to artists across the world. So to send little piece of Portugal to different parts of the world as an invitation for them to come here. So yes, we have a classical model, but it's only one fraction of what we do. I don't know if I answer the question. I don't even remember. I don't remember your question. To be
no. You answered more or less. Like I was asking this because like I agree with you in most of the things. I think that the museum.
You don't have to.
Only sorry. You
do not have to.
I do not have to.
You do not have to agree with me.
Oh, I don't have to agree. I know, but I do. So it's win-win. No, the thing is, I think that obviously the museum is a part of the entire exhibitional complex of Serralves, and the thing is, like, it's becoming clearer that the way that the public response to exhibitions is as important as the way it responds to the museum experience, you know. And I think that one of the reasons why Serralves has extended their exhibitions and their artworks to the garden is precisely because of the importance that the garden has, that the park has, and how visitors go to have the experience of a good afternoon in the park.
But for me, it extends beyond that. I think the way I see it, of course, I think that if we talk about rethinking the museum, and I'm not sure it's, you know, well, what Serralves is for me is the rethinking, or what I'm learning from being at Serralves is that I'm learning from a model which is totally inserted in a civic fabric, maybe more than other places I have worked with, because it is porous to other creative experience, whether it's with an aromatic garden and the work that my colleague Antonio Gouveia is doing, or the work that my colleague Antonio Preto is doing at Casa do Cinema Manuel de Oliveira, or what we do. And in the middle of that, you have this piece of nature that also allow us to think differently about the way we can insert environmental concern, cultural concern, civic concern. For me, it's very interesting, again, when we did a project with Olafur Eliasson, that, you know, he was fascinated by the farm, and it really totally changed the approach, I think, of what he did for Serralves. And that this aspect of what we do, for me, is a good image. I'm learning from it. I don't have a specific answer for that, but this civic part of Serralves is really, for me, the place where, if I can, I would like to, I don't know about rethinking the museum, but adapt my way of thinking to what can be done in this specific place.
It's interesting how you're talking about all the relationships between the different let's say characteristics of the entire Serralves complex, and thinking as well as to MAAT as a combination of three different subjects, you know, like, and the way as you, Beatrice, are proposing them you said on your interview to public something that I found really interesting, is that you are not really concerned about you know, about like, you're not really concerned that that architecture, art, and technologies are explored in the museum as subjects themselves, but more as the way as they are used to see the world, you know, to see the current situation. And for me, that's interesting as well to in a context so specific as it is MAAT, where you have three focus of three subjects of focus, and the way they can actually, the things can migrate from one subject to another. But at the same time, like, isn't there also a responsibility of the museum about thinking about those subjects, like the research about those subjects, the definition of those practices? Do you think there are two separate ways of looking at the approach to the way of showing these three subjects? I don't know, I'm probably not that clear.
No, I understand. I mean, I think that it's an issue of, like you're saying, like, if it's, you know, I don't intend to sort of like objectify, you know, like the issue, you know, like the practices of art, architecture, and whatever technological creativity. But I think that in any form of cultural creative practice, you know, there's always you know, like a double side. They always have a double-sided nature. So they are all, you know, or as form of practice, both can be intended as, you know, cultural artifacts or as forms of cultural agency. So things are never just the thing that they are, right, optically. So in a sense, that what I mean to do and what I intended with that phrase that you are, you know, taking of the interview is that, but this is because, and it's partly connected to, I intend to, you know, work with MAAT, you know, and the program that I'm preparing is how to create a, how to plan to work with practitioners, not attempting to create sort of like fixed, both temporarily or, you know, disciplinary fixed understanding of what a practice is, but what it does in its own time. And so use them as lenses through which you can kind of, not lenses, sorry, but like tools through which you can navigate the present. So, but I think that there is an important aspect too in what we are confronted with, is that, you know, institutions exist within cities and within contexts, so and within institutional landscapes. So I don't think that definitely there's no, I mean, it's a little bit of a tautology, you know, to think rethinking the museum, because, you know, ideally then institutions of culture can, you know, change and transform as they should, you know, first according to time, second according to the directors that they have. But I think that there are also, like, for me, an interesting conversation that I have been having in the past, you know, like few days and weeks also with our colleagues is it even possible to rethink a business model for a museum, you know, like departing or taking, you know, like this situation as a springboard, as a starting point. And while we're all now kind of like captivated, you know, into this form of like digital communication, and of course this is like, you know, it's making wonders, you know, because it's really pushing or forcing even certain institutions that were not really so adept, so you're investing in that to you know, try to upskill themselves. But it's also, I think, like potentially opening up questions, so like how can a museum, for example, behave or appropriate methodologies or modalities from other type of, you know, let's say forms of like collective cultural consumptions, like you know, streaming services, like on-demand contents, you know, like, I mean, if I am a museum that has technology, you know, like in its same, is like, I can, you know, I cannot simply look at it, you know, as a bridge, you know, or as a tool. Is like, what kind of are the declinations or the denominations, you know, of what, you know, in the good and the bad, you know, technology does in our lives. I think that that's important, that as an institution you always look at the context you belong to, you know, like to try to empower or leverage, you know, like yes, cultural practitioners, you know, like and creators, artists, architects, or whatever they are. So, and that's not simply, you know, and that's not done, I mean, like by giving them a stipend or, you know, giving them a show. Like, so these are questions that we should ask.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Hi, so I thank you again because we have some questions for the audience, and I promise you I won't have you at the office for very long. And well, thank you for the interventions, and I'm really sorry that the audience cannot be here because I think there were some really interesting, funny moments and we would have all smiled together. So let me ask you what the questions we are receiving here. There are two that I will put together. Basically, I mean, you've been making references to it, and of course something that is very clear, but it's to be very, very direct. Another one enters, so I will ask you three questions. How do you see the museum after this situation of the pandemic, and how that will affect this context, your program of exhibitions? I think we can put these two questions together regarding the way it will affect the functionality of the institution and also the program, if it will, or how it will. I don't know who wants to start.
How it will affect it? Well, of course, I think that's
apart from the obvious, but I mean, also from the contents, no? Like, do you think it will affect in the contents?
not in my case. Going straight ahead with the things we were planning because they remain relevant. So if the question is, are we going to do COVID-related contents? No. If the question is, are we taking into account what this is doing to us as a collectivity? Yes, but I mean, I don't think that the crisis is kind of like unveiling new factors or new things. It's just heightening them and stressing them. So if anything, it's just helping us to make certain topics more, you know, vocal.
I would agree with that. For me, the content is one thing, of course. I think I read somewhere, it was somewhere on Instagram, it was like, imagine the confinement without literature, music, art, too much cooking. So what I think what it did, and I don't say that to be tricky about it, but I think it has reinforced something which is quite obvious, is that we need art. That in period of crisis, people find solace, they ground themselves into their culture, into art. I mean, I've never seen so many playlists. Like, I don't want to know now what people are listening. Enough. But there's so many playlists, reading lists, movie lists, posting of art. And that for me, actually, I think it was great. And I think it really shows how necessary institution like museum, however we approach it differently, but our central art and culture are to the construct of a community. For me, it was like whether you live in Los Angeles, in Porto, in Lisbon, in Marfa, Texas, wherever, that the centrality of art and culture became so clear. So it will change. I don't think we're going to change our content. I totally agree with Beatrice. I think for that, I trust the artist. You know, the artist will know. The artist, the work we're going to show, whether it's art, architecture, and technology, they will show us the way. What it will change is actually the way, I go back to the civic mission I was talking about earlier, the way we communicate to the outside. How porous are we going to be to the need and expectation? You know, people are suffering. People don't have work. People don't have money. How does it going to affect their ability to connect to what we are offering. And Beatrice said, like, I think very very true. Like we need to understand how we're going to be able to stream, to have an online presence. I also think that the importance of art institution, whether they are museums or theater, I think their role as also the educational part of our mission is incredibly, became incredibly important, that people look back to us, institution, museum, for educational content. So I think what it has done for us, it may be at, you know, with this explosion of museum that we all experienced over the last few years, we might have, you know, walked away a little bit from the core. I think what this crisis has been doing is that, for me, it has reinforced the core value that institutions are standing for, giving creative voice, alternative voice, coming for artists, because the communities are expecting that from us. Sorry, sound like a priest.
That was very interesting.
Scary.
No. Let me ask you another question. As you know, ARCO Lisboa has a focus on Africa since last year, like the edition of last year. And one of the people in our audience is asking, how relevant or prevalent is African art in your museums, if it is?
Prevalent?
If it's present or...
I can't, well, we haven't yet announced, you know, what the programs there are to come, so I cannot
You're not going to do it. I know you're not going to do it.
But, I mean, we're, I think that there are sort of like, I mean, the natural connections that there are, you know, like with the African continent or, you know, like with explorations that come from there as a vantage point for us are going to be explored in a variety of practices, not necessarily art even. I mean, on Museum Day on May 18, actually we organized a special music program online. It was the beginning of our new a new music and sound program that we have launched basically digitally with this event. And we realized it in collaboration with the in Uganda-based music and artistic collective and we collaborated so that basically 6 musicians from actually different parts of the continent and not just Africa, but they work with this collective there based, created these performances, you know, DJ sets and performances, you know, just for this special day. But what I mean to say is that the idea of like working with a specific context was also to kind of articulate discourse around how, you know, around the you know, like the grassroots and the communitarian, you know, like value and power of music, you know, and also talk of it from off centers, you know, or not the centers that would normally kind of sit within, you know, like the mainstream, you know, music industry, let's say, but that at the same time, you know, like provide views and avenues, you know, like for these artists, you know, just, you know, musical artists, to find expression, to find a sense of belonging, you know, like to experiment and etc. Which was amazing. I mean, I kind of had it there for 4 hours, for the 4 hours, you know, that went on. But yeah, I mean, this I think would be just enmeshed in the program.
That was present also last week when in the conversation between Toby Mayer and Catarina Vaspinto, and I mean that was the idea. And the presence is so intertwined in the city and the cultural scene that it's not like necessary to program, like obviously, but it's present somehow. In your case, Philippe, in the case of Serralves, I think Philippe froze. Did you froze?
Philippe froze.
He actually froze.
Yeah, he froze.
He did not. He's not pretending.
No, he froze.
Okay. Well, we will have him back.
Like got this.
Well,
think.
Since we started, we received a lot more some more questions, but as I promised, it will be more or less 30 minutes, like a short talk, short conversation. And I'm so sorry we cannot say goodbye to Philippe, but I think it's time to say thank yous, some thank yous and goodbyes. So, well, thank you.
Thank you so much once again, Maribel, and thank you
for being here. It was very interesting and knowing more about your two models, which are very, very appealing. And as I said, we just want to be there again and seeing you there. So.
I hope to see you also in real life.
Very soon, in real life.
Very soon, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yes, and well, we say like goodbye to Philippe, like.
Yes. Bye, Philippe.
Bye, frozen.
But thank you, everybody, and thank you all of you who attended and were here listening today. Thank you so much for being here. See you soon next week in the continuation of the program. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.